So it's all very interesting looking at it from the sort of Western philosophical and religious traditions where, there's been the implicit Descartes model of, human beings being the machine with the ghost inside and the soul inside of the body,
Right.
and animals just having the body without the soul. And I think that there has been, that has been used to conveniently place us, first of all, on the top of the food chain and so forth. But also, hasn't that as well enabled us to exploit animals in the past, right? So eating them, keeping them as pets, right? Doing experiments on them, all of that. How have those things been affected by the sort of emerging awareness of animals' personhood, so to speak?
I think that you even said part of it, it's an emerging awareness. And it does, I think, in a really positive way, challenge us all to think about our relationship to animals. Because it is kind of arbitrary and convenient, and I think very culturally constructed in a way. So, during that time, I would go to work, and I would spend most of my days with chimpanzees, observing and recording their behavior, very fascinated by that. And, then I might go to lunch and have a hamburger or chicken or something like that, and pork. Obviously, these are pigs are brilliantly intelligent, very smart animals. And then, you go home and you've got your goldfish and your hamster and your cat or whatever, whatever it is. So we do place all of these different, these are all culturally constructed ideas as to where we place value with different types of animals. And so you have to kind of consider where that, I really think that even if you look back 10 years ago, you do see more of an awareness about that now. And that we're all going to reach different conclusions about what that means. Do we want to be a vegetarian? Do we want to avoid certain types of foods? Do we want to decide that maybe certain animals shouldn't be kept in cages if we want to have them as pets? Maybe they should have a more optimal environment that mimics their natural habitat more. Zoos are starting to take into account how they construct their exhibits and whether or not these are beneficial to the animals, or are they languishing in a small box for 40 years and just eating and depressed. So there's a lot more awareness now than there used to be, and I think that partially does come from the sciences and more of an embrace with certain areas of science. Certainly evolutionary biologists and wildlife biologists will tell you that there is more of a connection there that we need to look at. I'm not sure if that answers everything.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
that's fascinating. So on the subject of pets, I know that in the world of mammals, most mammals display very obvious pro-social behaviors where, because they're social animals like us, they tend to cooperate and have conflict and do all sorts of things that we do, and we'll get into that a little bit more, I think. I've read that cats are sort of on the outside of this, and I know many of us have cats.
Careful what you say now, careful.
So, can you perhaps hypothesize in a very delicate way
Absolutely.
why it is we still have an affinity for cats, or first of all, what is it that cats don't have that these other animals tend to? Why don't they have these traits, and why do we still tend to like them?
Well, I'm not a cat expert. I don't have cats. I have family members who have cats, and I would never disparage the cat family. What I immediately go to from that is cats have been what we have at home, have been domesticated for about 6,000 years. Dogs, anywhere from 15,000 to maybe some archaeological evidence showing like 85, 100,000 years. Dogs have been, in the form of wolves, are really on the periphery of our lives. And so I think that has a lot to do with its selective breeding over a long period of time. And cats, obviously, any of you who have them will know, they retain some traits, some of their wild traits, a little more likely than a domestic dog. But I would add to that many of the other types of animals that we keep as pets retain wild traits. Most of the parrot species, for example, are really wild, even if they're very accustomed to human interaction, unless it's a smaller, like a cockatiel or a parakeet. Most other parrots are wild, and most of the pets that we keep haven't been domesticated long enough. Domestication really can only, it seems to be only certain species of animals seem to be really agreeable to domestication. So livestock that we've had for thousands of years, and really dogs being probably we still drawn to them regardless? I think because they come in a manageable package, arguably, and certainly do exhibit a lot of the same types of affection that they would exhibit to their own species. So being wild doesn't mean, wow, I'm wild, I want to call your eyes out. It doesn't always mean that. It could just mean that you're less likely to be fully domesticated, and that's okay as long as it's a safe animal to have in the home. And I think that that is part of the appeal, is that they're small, compact, certainly extremely affectionate in many cases, but they have retained a little bit more independence. And also, I think it also has to do with personalities of us as human beings. What we want from a pet, what we expect from a pet. So, you know, and actually a cat being more independent nature can be far more agreeable for a lot of people as opposed to your dog that's needy. My dog follows me everywhere I go. I don't know very many cats that do that. So.
Interesting. About personalities of people, which you mentioned, I know that anyone who's studied animals or pet owners as well notice the personalities in animals, non-human animals as well. I think that there's a sense that many of us like to deny that when we talk about livestock and we talk about other, even domesticated, species or wild species. And I think that that's one of the other defenses that we create, or the separations that is artificial, that we use to separate ourselves from the animal kingdom. Working with chimps, what sorts of personalities did you experience in sort of the spectrum of personalities, and what did that teach you about sort of how we're maybe not as different from them as we once thought?
That's one of my favorite and most fascinating aspects for me personally, is the differences in personality. So I spent time with 30, 40 chimpanzees on a very regular basis, and some more on the periphery. And if I were to spend a lot of time getting to know everybody here, I would notice everybody's personality differences, and you notice mine as well. It's just so much the same way with them. You really notice a lot of distinct personality traits. It can be tied to rank sometimes, if they're a higher or low ranking individual. It can be tied to intelligence and cognitive ability sometimes as well. If you're part of a highly social species, it helps to be smart. It doesn't necessarily mean you're high ranking. It could. Some of the lower ranking animals were extremely brilliant, but they chose to interact with the other chimpanzees in a way that being of low rank worked for them. So it's extremely variable. I also think in the wild, this works very well for all sorts of animals to have variability in personality. It ties in with how animals come together for bonding purposes, for mating purposes, for the purposes of having, I think it is tied somewhat to genetic diversity in general. And so the range of personalities we see with the chimps, I think a good example of that is, let's say that I'm with research group A, and then there's another group who visits occasionally, but regularly enough from the Yerkes is actually split into two campuses, and there's chimpanzees at either one. I worked at the field station in a remote location. But we had another team that would come in from time to time who didn't work for Franz, they worked for another scientist. They would come in and they would describe a specific chimpanzee's behavior, personality, demeanor, cognition, just from casual observation, much less the science that they're collecting, in exactly the same way that we would, not ever even discussed it with one another. So it's kind of like if you say, oh, do you know so-and-so? Yes, I know him. He seems to be a very agreeable person, maybe a little bit, whatever, just any suite of personality traits that you could come up with that really kind of hone in on someone's basic personality. You can do the same thing with the chimpanzees and say, that chimpanzee, she does this, this, and this. She's, watch out if you approach her in this manner because she doesn't like that, and she prefers grapes over apples, and they have all sorts of preferences. She has this very strong attachment to this other chimpanzee over here, but she doesn't like this one over here. And then this other research team will come in and they'll, down the line, say the exact same thing about this animal. And we've never even talked about it before. We'll describe individuals in much the same way that you guys might describe one another once, as you're part of any community. So
I think that's interesting. That has interesting human implications, because we like to think of ourselves as one way, and if someone says that they notice something about us that we don't like, we say, oh, that's just that person's view of us, right? Or we like to defend ourselves, but if there's some objectivity to personalities, so if enough people start saying that we're a particular way, you know, we probably are. So this is something to think about, certainly. So from the individual to the group, I know that you mentioned, and it's still sort of a fascinating concept to me that I haven't wrapped my mind around, this notion of creating ranks and how that's done, and you know, how they know, you know, different animals within these groups, who's ranked where, and how you climb the ladder, or, you know, some I'm sure don't want to climb the ladder.
Sure.
If you could speak to all of those complex issues.
They, as far as their own awareness of who they have, you know, to have empathy and a theory of mind, which is, I understand that you all have a different experience than I do. We could argue that maybe some animals are not so good at that. It's kind of, or maybe your toddler is not so good at that. You know, young kids are not really good at theory of mind. They're like, it's kind of all about me, and everybody else needs to get in line. When we get a little bit older, we realize other people have their own ideas, and other people have their own awareness. And so there's this understanding that goes back and forth with humans and with chimpanzees and other apes, and I'm sure many other animals as well. That this individual over there, they're experiencing something different than I am. They have an awareness that I don't. So young, healthy male chimpanzees they're a male-dominated species as opposed to the sister species bonobos, which are more female-dominated. They have a lot of awareness about rank, and if you think about animals in the wild, this is very important because a high-ranking male has more opportunities for mating, and better food distribution, things like that. Things that really will help pass your genes along, quite literally. So rank is really important in that sense. And they do have a strong awareness and understanding of what is that other male chimpanzee up to that I might like to partake in or be a part of? Is that chimpanzee a high-ranking male who's having a lot of access to the females? He gets a lot of grooming. Grooming is a highly social currency with chimpanzees, spending a lot of time preening another individual, and it's kind of like how we talk to each other. So grooming creates really strong bonds, and they have a strong awareness of what is going on with the other. For example, if you have the alpha male, who in a group of, where I work, they're in an enclosed space. It's a large enclosed space, but they can't run off into a forest. So there's a little bit of difference there with captive versus wild animals. But if you have alpha chimp, Stuart is a chimp that, I'll take him for an example, a chimp that I worked with for many years. He's a strong, healthy, well-liked alpha, meaning he doesn't beat up on everybody unnecessarily. Sometimes he does, but not as much as some of the other chimps in his position. And then there's Amos, who used to be the alpha, but he, a little bit older, a little bit slower, still very smart and very strong, but he went ahead and relented, and the rank kind of switched a little bit. He accepted the fact, I can't keep up with this whippersnapper. I'm going to take the beta role. He's like, but there's a female here who's receptive for breeding. With chimpanzees, they have a 36. Human females can be very thankful that they don't have this condition, whereby the female chimpanzee, every 36 days, her rear end swells to the size of a volleyball. To male chimpanzees, this is awesome. To people coming to visit the chimps, they're like, what is that? My mother was horrified. She's like, I don't know what that is. I'm like, it's okay. It's in their world. It's all good. So if Amos, of course, just because you take the subordinate position doesn't mean that you are, well, I'm just going to sit back and retire and let him have all of the perks of being alpha. So you'll see Amos, and he's looking over there. What's Stuart doing? What's Stuart doing? Oh, he's over there with his mother, and they're grooming, and they're whatever, and there's other chimps around him, and he's distracted. Or maybe we've called Stuart in to sit down and do a video game session. He's a very bright chimp, and so Stuart doesn't have access to any of the females, which he didn't like. So Amos, you'll see Amos, and then they do a lot of this eye movement thing that you can read a lot from that. And so he's kind of looking at the female chimpanzee like, hey, he's not looking. There's a lot, and so they will surreptitiously, they'll go find some climbing structure that we built or something, and they will mate behind that where he can't see. And I have seen before, because we watch from above. We have this little tower that we climb up. It's a giant play yard, and if he finds out, there's, Amos is going to pay for that, and there's going to be a scuffle because he realizes that he has been deceived. He has been actively deceived by Amos, who lied about, or in essence deceived him. And chimpanzees are quite capable of deception, which is, it can be advantageous to be deceptive in this way. Lying is not always a bad thing. in the wild and Amos was able to do this, then he might be conferring his genes onto the next generation, unbeknownst to Stewart.
The female's not at fault, though. The
No.
anger is never directed towards.
It is sometimes directed towards the females, unfortunately, but Stewart's anger will probably initially be directed at Amos, since Amos is so large. In fact, he was bigger than Stewart. Amos has recently died, but he was bigger than Stewart. They sometimes